the women who are re-entering the workforce, they might be dealing with this next issue, because whether by email, phone, in-person communication is essential to an effective workplace. But what happens when you find yourself at a crossroads of exactly what to say?
Crossroads we find ourselves at quite often. So, Elizabeth Pearson is a women's career coach and the author of Career Confinement, the Mindset Shifting Guide to Achieving Fulfillment and Success in Your Profession.
That's right. She joins us this morning with helpful phrases and conversational tools to implement in the workplace. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning, ladies. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's a really important topic, and I often find, personally myself, it's not what I say, it's how I say it. And I think so many of us get a little frustrated at times when we're working and we're trying to figure out what is the best way to communicate with folks. So let's start first with email. You get an email and you're just like, what do we need to do before we hit reply?
Send.
Or
reply
the dreaded
all.
reply all? Yeah.
We've all done it, right?
Yeah.
We've been in a huff and we fired something off and then we're quickly trying to Google on how to unsend it. But I think that if you just take a moment and maybe put yourself in the other person's shoes, I always like to assume good intent, right?
Yes.
If you received something that came off as a little shady or like a little aggressive, I always think to myself, well, I assume that they didn't want it to come off this way. So I'm going to kind of like take the high road here. I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to put myself in their shoes and I'm going to create a response that it has less emotion. And listen, these days, if you get stuck, you can always use AI like ChatGPT.
Oh, snap.
Type out your email, pop it in there and say, please make this, sound positive versus aggressive. And it's wonderful. Technology can actually give you a little hand here.
Wow, AI.
Technology.
Yeah.
Okay. Who would have thought? That's okay.
ChatGPT used for the forces of good.
For the forces of good.
Yeah.
Passive phrases, though, not just applying to email, of course. They apply to in-person conversations and then on the phone. So, obviously, a whole different beast. So, what's the best way to approach a situation that could be delicate when you don't have a lot of time to think of response, aka speaking to you face to face?
Right. Or I have to walk down the hall to your office.
I would resist the urge to just have whatever that impulsive reaction is. I think it is okay to take a pause. And I think sometimes women, we try to fill this space if there's a lull in conversation, or we do feel like this obligation to fill this space with some pleasantries or niceties. And I think it's perfectly fine to say, you know what, I need some time to give that some real thought and I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
And then you can just keep it moving. But I would really resist the urge to feel like you need to immediately come back with an answer to something if you're not confident in that answer, or if you're going to use some of these phrases like I think, or I believe, or maybe we could, I would say just hit the pause button and tell them that you will get back to them.
There is power in the I don't know. I find when you're honest and you're like, you know what, I don't know, but I'm going to think about it, and then we're going to get back to this, right? It's okay to say I don't know.
Yeah.
If you don't know.
Figure it out.
As opposed to lying and making something up that you're not going to fulfill.
Right, 100,000%, you're right.
So a lot of times, I was talking about this, I mentor young women in the industry, and they're like, oh my God, I'm so afraid to go into my manager's office. Your manager doesn't want to punish you. They want to open up the lines of communication. Be that as it may. I think in our minds, we visualize like, this is how I want it to go. But then you get into your manager's office, and then the manager doesn't respond the way you were hoping they would, or the way you had envisioned or manifested that conversation.
Or you'd acted it out.
Right, or the way you acted it out, right? What are the next steps that you do?
I always love when clients will recap the email or the meeting, whatever the face-to-face was, in an email from their perspective. So you can craft a thoughtful email and say, in the meeting, we had this discussion on point A, B, and C. Here's what I understood as the takeaways and the action steps. And I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. And maybe you were asking for a promotion and your boss was like, yeah, it's not going to happen. It's been a rough 6 months. Come back to me whenever. You could reiterate that in the email and say, I just want to make sure I'm clear on what those hurdles or goals are that I have to hit in this next 6 months, so that when we revisit this topic of my salary, I've exceeded those expectations. So I think it's really good to recap it in writing, and then you can try to kind of add your perspective and kind of nail them down to some tactical things that you can do to improve the situation.
Okay, and real quick, piggybacking off of that, going back to the real-time, in-person, face-to-face conversations.
Yeah.
You're having it, you don't like what is being received after you're putting out what you've practiced or rehearsed or whatever. How do we fix our face, if you will, not let everything show emotion-wise upon hearing less than stellar news?
Yeah, I love that. I don't think that we have to paint a smile on our faces all the time, ladies. I think that it's okay to have a mild reaction. I wouldn't, gasp or something like that. But I think women are conditioned to be pleasant and to be likable and to be nurturing. And I don't believe that those same standards are applied to men. Men have emotions on their face, and we're not asking them to fix their face.
Right.
So I think that, it's okay to show some emotion. I do, tell clients it's best not to have extreme emotion, but I don't think we have to be totally stoic. I think it's okay to show disappointment. And I think that that disappointment can actually be, a wonderful jumping off point for a deeper conversation.
Right. So let's go over some of the common phrases that maybe we've used and alternatives so that we're not digging ourselves into a hole that we can't get out of. So the first one is you're being tasked with something and you respond, say, "That's not my job." You say instead,
I think we're probably thinking it. It's okay to think it, but say, "I'm not sure that falls within my area of responsibility,
Right.
but I'm going to check my workload," right? Like, let me see if I can do something so that I can make room for this, or I can refer you to somebody who that is their expertise to handle this.
Okay.
How about this next one? One of my faves. "This is how we've always done it."
Yeah, that's a popular one.
It's brutal, right? I think that it's really first good to validate that the way that they've done it worked for them. But currently, there's a new set of circumstances, and you think that this is a wonderful opportunity to approach it in a new direction, bring fresh eyes to it. And I think, too, you can say things like, when we're prioritizing this, we're actually deprioritizing something else. So, yeah, make sure that they're very clear on what the repercussions are if you prioritize something.
And acknowledge that you realize that this is something that they did before, and it's possible that there can be a new way of doing it, which leads
more
to
than one way.
Which leads to the next one, the immediate response. "That's impossible. We're going to go to the moon." That's impossible. What do we say instead?
I love this one. I love this one. I think you do acknowledge that's going to be a challenge. And again, you could say, "I'm not so sure, we'll see what we can do." But I also think it's really good to say, "I'm concerned that this might impact our ability to deliver high quality work." Right? So if somebody is saying something really pie in the sky and you're not so sure it can happen, you can say, "We could do that, but I don't know it's going to be up to our quality standard of the work that we want to produce."
Oh my gosh.
Fantastic.
Love it, love it, love it. Thank you for helping us not hit reply all before we need to hit reply all.
And as we mentioned earlier, don't forget to grab your copy of Career Confinement wherever you buy your books. Thank you so much, Elizabeth Pearson, for being here.
Thank you, ladies.